So welcome everybody to this seminar. I'm happy to see quite a people here, although there's all these things of school, all the students leaving school. But I'm very happy to have Palle Dahlstedt here. We're going to talk about big generative AI, implication for creativity, art and artists, something that we are very interested in here at the Institute. So Palle is a professor of interaction design at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, University of Gothenburg and Chalmers University of Technology, and lecturer in electronic music composition at the Academy of Music and Drama, Gothenburg. I thought he was an adjunct professor in art and technology at Aalborg University.
That's still true.
That's still true. That's very good. So it's lots of things. And you did your PhD in AI for artistic creativity from Chalmers University of Technology in 2004. That's quite early to do this. Don't know. Did we even use the word AI in those days?
No, actually it was A-Life at that time. But nowadays everything is called AI. So,
exactly. That's
so it was
kind of
evolutionary computation.
Sounds unheard of. Evolutionary algorithms as creative tools for contemporary composers. That was the title of your PhD thesis. And you have continued this. I mean, the kind of entanglement of art and advanced technology in connection to creative and aesthetic, what the kind of implications are for creativity and aesthetics. So we are looking forward to hearing you this in a kind of way that no one else have presented something here at the Institute. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm not very fond of slides, so you will see my notes. If it's too small, let me know because I can zoom in, but then we lose overview. So it's always a compromise. So I'm going to jump around in a mind map, which also lets me skim through certain things. We don't go to the smallest branches if time doesn't allow, or if there's a question I can dive into. I actually have all my other lectures hidden on the left side. So if there are other questions, we can go into other notes too. So thanks for that presentation, Gustav. I can add to that, or just how did I end up doing these kind of things? Basically, the personal stories. I started as a programming hacker and a classical piano student when I was 8 in 1979. And since then, I was looking at how to join these things. And that took a while to find a path where I could do these things together. So I was programming and I was playing, and I became, I'm trained as a composer. I teach composition at the Academy of Music, but after I finished my composition studies, I did a doctorate at Chalmers, as you heard, where I developed tools for composers to create both new scores and new sounds. I did them because I wanted to have them myself, because I was curious. Some of them ended up in commercial products. Also, those algorithms, they were licensed by synthesizer manufacturers. And since then, I have sort of zoomed out. I still develop stuff for my own artistic practice. I see myself as a practice-based artistic researcher, and most of my research funding comes from the Swedish Research Foundation, Vetenskapsrådet, on the artistic research side. I've been leading 4 projects there since 2006, I think. So all my questions, the perspective that I will give you is sort of the insider from the artist's point of view, based on decades of practice with algorithms that of course change over time. They get more and more complex, and gradually zooming out and sort of, when you get older as a researcher, you start thinking about, maybe I should write a book about these things, because you have this kind of overview. It's not like one more slice of new knowledge in a paper. It's more like, oh, I've been playing physically with algorithms, improvising with them on stage since the 90s. How does that feel? And with this lecture, I don't know if the link was published, but maybe it will be published. There was also a YouTube link to a performance lecture. I'm not going to play music today, but normally I actually do that also. I'm very often on stage still. I'm still very active. It's a link to a performance lecture where I actually sit by the piano with a headset, and I speak about how it is to improvise with algorithms while I'm doing it with 5 different algorithms, and reflect on how it feels and what it does to my playing. or to our play. So it's a 20-minute little performance lecture that I also done live 3 times. So just a hint if you think there's too little music. Yes, I think they will attach the link to this video afterwards or send it out because you already have the link somewhere. Yes, I think you mostly said everything here. I won't actually go there, so I will jump. I also, depending on, I assume the audience. Well, we have the audience in the room. Please come in. And we have audience online that I don't know. I assume that it's a broad audience, so I probably need to explain things. But please let me know also if I'm too thorough. So let me see here. Let me, yeah, this is a little bit of what I talked about. How do I end up in this thing? First, when I study composition, I learned how to make one good piece of music, hopefully. When I did that, I start to think about, okay, how do I make another good piece of music? And then after a while, you start to see, okay, what are the constants here? What are the principles of making good music? So then you can you understand the meta level of creative process, and then how do things need to vary over time, etc. How do I, as a composer, need to develop over time? And that leads to no understanding of the principles of good music and of what an artist is doing. And then you start writing algorithms that sort of emulate these kind of meta properties, because to write a piece of software that creates one good piece of music but the same one all the time, that's totally trivial. But to make something that surprises you continuously and that takes a long time to exhaust the possibilities, that's hard. So in the end, if you just zoom out, you have to emulate the life of a composer, or the artist. And we're not there yet. And this is actually sort of like a hint of one of the problems of current AI, that it's not emulating the actual processes, but just the results.
So, in question of clarification, are you going to talk more about that, the emulating a kind of creative person?
I will talk. Well, I will talk about the problems because we're not doing it.
Well, okay.
So we're going to get back to that. So there are some basic facts. Obviously, there exists algorithmically generated art and music. When I say art, I always include music. I see all of this as the same. I cheat in lots of art forms, but I have full training, 10 years full-time studies in music, so I'm pretty confident in that field. I work with other art forms too, and I'm quite convinced that I can argue that most of what I say is applicable to other art forms too. So this is not a new thing. You should be aware that composers, for example, have been experimenting with algorithms carried out by manual work for centuries. There have been compositions based on throwing dice. Mozart did a thing based on the letters in his favorite girls' names so that he could impress them, playing a minuet based on their name. That's a way of flirting, I guess. And even back in the antiquity, people were writing poems based on various formulas and visual appearance of the text and things like that. And so there are lots of, and every musical form is sort of an algorithm, like a sonata or a fugue or a sonnet, things like that. So this has, of course, existed for a very long time. But nowadays, things have exploded. In the 90s, we were using various chaotic systems, good old-fashioned logic-based AI, artificial life, and these kinds of algorithms. The kind of deep learning algorithms that we have now, they didn't exist yet. Of course, neural networks existed. But what happens when they get gradually more and more advanced is that you have a potential of more complexity. You have a different kind of output because the algorithms can deal with not with like individual pixels or rectangular little cutouts, but with patterns, with styles, etc. And what happens is, and you see, I tend to go to the conclusions right away, but we will talk about it for a long time. There's a continuous development. I'm super curious always about new technologies. but I'm also completely convinced that it doesn't give us better art. It gives us different art or new kinds of art. But we should also remember, and this is also a fact, but it's often overlooked when we talk about AI, there are humans involved at all stages still. And we will talk more about that too. And there are lots of important questions. Will AI ever be independently creative? Do we even want that? Does it matter who made the art? Which is a very important question right now with all these big generative systems throwing out images, mostly now also songs. And is it meaningful? Meaning, of course, a very difficult word, but does it touch us? Can we be provoked by it if there's no sender? I like to compare it with the word provocation. You can be provoked by somebody. If somebody says something offensive, there's a person behind it. There's an intention that you react to. But if there's an algorithm that by accident or for some reason shows you a picture that's very offensive, who do you get angry about? And it's sort of the same when you're touched by an artwork. Is there a person behind it, or is it just a pretty picture? And is it even art when it's not coming from a being of the same kind as myself? And this relates to their age-old aesthetic discussions about the beauty of nature, for example, which doesn't come from a person unless you're of certain religious inclinations where they think there's some kind of person god that created it. Some people say that natural beauty is very different. There's no sender. It doesn't tell the story of somebody who struggled to create this artwork, but it's still beautiful. This is actually quite interesting. I have a personal definition of art that's a bit pretentious, but it's sort of practical because I know what I mean. For me, art is a result of human effort which can be subject to reflection. That's pretty broad, but it works for me. And now we're in a situation where re-asking the same questions again. Can we remove human? And can we remove effort? And what is even effort for a machine? As someone who prefers, I developed experimental musical instruments, and there are lots of people doing music with laptops. That's fine, but I'm a classically trained pianist, so I'm in Swedish, in Germanic languages, we have the word musikant, which is like an embodied musician. The fiddler that stomps, that kind of cliche of a musician. I'm more that kind of musician. I want to sweat on stage. I want to work for every sound, and I don't want it to make sound if I don't move. And that's maybe a conservative view, but that is actually what gives me pleasure when playing, and it's also what communicates with the listeners. So effort is very central in electronic music, actually, and is used a lot in the discussions. I also want to share my view of creative process so that we have, at least you understand my thinking about it. I've published quite a bit about that, trying to understand the inner mechanics of artistic creative process to be able to recreate it or understand how we can relate to it in computers. I see it as a search in a space of possibilities, and the extension of that space is defined usually by the medium you work in, like the material. If I write musical scores, that defines what can be done. Of course, I can tweak that by inventing new signs and have some explanation of them. So of course it can be bent. But if you simplify, if you're a visual artist, it's defined by light on a usually rectangular space, but you can of course do other things. And also in this view of creative process, I could talk for 3 hours just about this view of creative process, but I won't. I will just give you the elevator version. Basically, we have this space of what is theoretically possible, and in that space, you use certain tools. It can be a brush or a violin or a certain synthesizer or Photoshop or something, and those tools allow you to move in that space, in that parameter space or solution space. This is a term often used in maths and physics, meaning it contains everything that is possible, and one point is one result, basically. So somewhere in the middle is that empty paper before you started drawing, and then you draw one line, which means you take one step towards the point that represents that empty paper with one line on it, and somewhere in the far corner is Mona Lisa, or a picture of a monkey or a boat or something like that. So you can travel in that space using tools. And we can think of the space as having, maybe it's hard to measure the distance, but we can at least imagine that some things are close and some things are further away, depending on how many applications of a tool you need to apply. Another central concept in how I think about creative process is that you have, it's extended over time. And why you do this search, you have one representation in your head, I call that the conceptual representation, and you have one representation outside of yourself, which is like the sketch, the lump of clay, or my temporary score as it is right now outside of myself. In my mind, I have the view of what I want to do. It can be a set of rules or a vision of how the final result would be. It's always vague in some ways. And when you try to realize it, you have to resolve those vaguenesses. And you can resolve them in various ways that are unpredictable because you're not perfect with your tools, or because you simply didn't know what you wanted in all detail. And you sort of oscillate between these two forms. And you rethink your concept when you look at the current state and something happened by mistake here that makes it more interesting. So let's promote that to a sort of an important part of the conceptual representation, these kind of things. And of course, these processes are also affected by a lot of outside forces. Somebody could spill coffee on your score, or you have a teacher that comes and says, oh, that doesn't work. You should do that. And that affects your decisions, maybe going against the teacher, going with the teacher, who knows. So if you want to read more about that thing, there's a book chapter here in a book called Computers and Creativity, where I sort of published this view of creative process. Yes?
Clarification, if you go back there.
Yes?
There. So that other people interact with you when you're doing this, is that cultural baggage, social expectation, and memory, or where did that happen? Because there are many creative processes.
That can actually happen outside. Of course, their interactions are also affected by cultural baggage.
Yeah, they are. I mean, it's such
but
an important...
I would say it happens. Now, this is I actually have some slides about this one, but not here. When I carry out my ideas, I call that implementation, to make a sketch or to refine the sketch. In that process, somebody else could interact or speak to me or have opinions, or even interact directly with the material representation, which affects the next step. So in this loop...
I thought, I mean, you're taking kind of an individualist perspective, but this could equally be a group.
Yes, and I talk about that in that book chapter. Yes, if it's a duo improvisation, for example, the material form is the sound in the room, and it's more like a loop like this. We have separate, probably very different ideas in our heads. The idea of what we want to play or what we plan to play, and they are renegotiated every second. But we share the material representation, the sounds that we make together. So yes, it applies to collaborative creativity too. But there's not time to go into all these intricacies. So please read the chapter. I mean, I'm happy to answer questions, but it's also easy to get stuck. It's easy to get stuck, and we're only on the introduction branch. We should also sort of be a little on the same plane about technology and art. And I happen to be professor of art and technology, so I had to think a lot about that. The technology, of course, I mean, tools, everything is technology in a way, every tool. But the kind of technology that we have now is, I'm sounding a little bit confused because I was looking for something that wasn't here. Yeah, it's actually here. So these three roles of technology, the main roles, I mean, you can use new tools as a way to realize ideas that you could do before, but you do it better now. We have better ways of creating images that are faster, etc. But we usually realize after a while that they also change the way we think about images. We use technology as a medium to contain or harbor the artworks, like video can harbor moving images in a different way than film can, etc. But technology is also a medium for expression, a medium for manifestation of ideas. And during the second half of 20th century, this became very clear with things such as information arts, where there are artworks where the corruption of information in a network is actually the essence of the artwork. Somebody writes an algorithm that messes up websites. That's a classic example from the 90s, for example, or these kind of where it's actually communication or the information that is the main thing. And sometimes it's a bit unclear for me if it's the music that comes out or if it's the experimental instrument that I created that is sort of the expression. We talk about composed instruments. Classically, we talk about a composition that embodies aesthetic ideas, but we also have composed instruments that embody so many aesthetic decisions. So it doesn't matter what I play, it becomes the same work every time. I usually don't write scores. I'm more of an improviser on stage, but it's still a work. It still has a name for many of my compositions. And maybe this one also, finally, I should go on into AI because time runs fast. I think it's also very important for artists to understand the technology they work with. Of course, not everyone can be like a physicist or an electronics engineer, but I don't believe in this kind of free imagination. Our thoughts travel based on in these spaces of possibilities, based on the mental models of the tools that we know, and based on things that we have seen and heard, and we know, okay, an image can look like that, music can sound like that. Stone Age people probably couldn't imagine in their heads orchestral music or electronic music because they had obviously never heard that, and they didn't even know about those. Those tools didn't exist. So, and we can dive deeply into that too. But I think that learning a tool in a very wide sense, including theories, etc., is sort of, and having words for things, having concepts, frees the mind because it actually creates all these pathways of imagination. Yes. I think I don't have to go super deep into what is AI, and there are lots of branches here and like history of AI, etc. But AI today mostly is based on what we say AI in normal speech is big neural networks inspired by how our neurons work, but the last 15 years roughly they have become deeper, meaning more layers of neurons and larger and bigger server parks and much more kilowatts, so that they can do amazing things. But it's the same technology with some tweaks that was originated many decades ago actually and was out of fashion for quite a while, which is an interesting history in itself. The kind of AI I'm sort of a specialist in, that I did my PhD about, was evolutionary algorithms, which is sort of an alternative, Darwin in a box, breeding solutions to problems. It's sort of interesting because we will get to the limitations of the current neural network models. But the short story is evolution is better at exploring the unknown, while neural networks are better at finding the most probable, most likely solution. And I'm going to skip these things and go on. And I'm going to maybe skip these things too, because I think the most interesting stuff, I'll do the short version of this. So there are lots of possibilities. Why would you use AI in art? Now it's everywhere, so everybody knows how to do a picture in DALL-E or Midjourney, etc. It was much harder before, but this has created a sort of a shared awareness that this exists. But we can still think of these algorithms. There are three levels where they can exist. It's still the most common is a black box process. Sort of you tell it generate an image and it does that. There are some signs of when it happens. It takes a minute or so, and there are thousands of servers somewhere in California that does it for you, and you get the image. There are other situations, especially musicians are interested in that, algorithms that you play with, like in that video I mentioned that we don't have time to show here, where I actually play on a piano and it listens to me and plays something back. to simplify. And the third level would be when it's autonomous and creates stuff by itself without even being asked to do so, which can be, if we get to a far future perspective, that can be interesting. So these algorithms could potentially help us explore what is possible in new ways, get us further away, further corners of these spaces with less effort, which can be interesting. We can create much more complex images with super small effort these days with Midjourney, for example. But it also leads to new expressions because we do things in new ways, put in the same effort as we did before with different results. The algorithms today, as I mentioned before, they allow us to interact with them in a much higher abstraction level than before, with patterns, styles. I can say, make this picture in the style of Van Gogh, the most classic example. Maybe more interesting, I think, is to think of it as we can create systems of algorithms that interact with themselves and with humans, etc., which is a very dynamic situation that's very suitable for music. And also we can use algorithms for something I call the gardening paradigm. It's not my idea originally. A lot of people think about like creation as a gardening. You sow something and it grows, and you tweak it, you give it water, nourishment, etc. But it also has sort of a process of its own, and you're not in control of every detail, but you still can interact with it while it happens, and then you harvest the results. And that's sort of how I view the creative process when I work with evolutionary algorithms. And this is a very interesting paradigm where you sort of get help of an algorithm to create something. Yes, I think I will. There are lots of interesting things here. And something I will talk a lot about is agency with algorithms in art. It's a tricky one. I mentioned before, who's the person behind the artwork? Who is the agent? Who did the actions? Who took the choices? And it's sort of important because it affects how we perceive the work, how we feel that there is a person behind, or there's a robot behind, or whatever. And I also think it's a bit tricky because in the public discussion about these things, it's often treated in a very strange way. And we already, like 10 years ago, we saw headlines like computers can paint like Van Gogh. But no, they can't. But people can use a style transfer algorithm to make an image have the same color properties and textural properties as a Van Gogh painting. But the computer didn't go out there and have experiences and give them shape in an image, right? So there's the perceived agency. There's also the real agency. What influences these processes? And I think this is an important thing because it has implications for our expectations from algorithms. It has political implications, ethical implications, and it's a PR problem for AI also, and has influenced the discussion about AI in a bad way. So that was sort of the teaser branch for the big agency branch. So I assume you're quite familiar with the term agency. I mean, it's everywhere in various discussions in research, etc., philosophy. And so the strong meaning is basically the capacity to act. But there's also sort of a weaker meaning from for example, Bruno Latour, that tools can have embedded agency, and a thing can have agency, as seen in this quote, canals carved by the agency of running water, for example. And there are other, Richard Gregory, for example, talks about tools embedding intelligent behavior. Vygotsky had ideas about that, embedded cultural behavior in tools, etc. I have sort of a version of the Latour thing where I talk about influence. He used the word, Latour used the word making a change. What change does the existence of this object do? I think it's, since we have processes, I think of it in terms of influence. What has affected this process? And we can have a thought experiment. If I change the tool, what kind of effect would it have Of course, it's very hard because of butterfly effects, etc. Process can totally go in a different direction. But I still think this is an interesting question to ask. And these influences happen all the time during this process. There is very remote influence. If we go down here, for example, some of my music has some agency from Darwin because he invented the algorithms I use. We don't have his intentionality left, right? But there are traces of his ideas because I implemented algorithms that are based on his work and many other researchers after him, of course. There's also embedded agency by my parents because of genes. So, you know, it's really a complex situation. We can also look as influence as information flow, if you think of it in information theory perspective. The amount of information put into a process by various agents. And information can, I mean, there are some exact measurements like information entropy and all kinds of things, but and complexity measures, etc. But I will just limit myself to talk about, you know, little information or lots of information. When you write a prompt to Midjourney, it's like 10 words. That's not a lot of information. If you paint on a painting for a year, that's a lot of information through your gestures and choices. I mean, it's quite a difference in scale there. And you can see that Midjourney has a huge amount that can actually be measured. It's like terabytes of information in the model that it brings to your image, and you bring 10 words. And you see there's an imbalance there, which is quite crucial. It's of course not always possible to follow these kind of traces of this influence or information. Always because it's lost, it's not all of it ends up in the actual artistic artifact, if that is what the process ends with. Some of it is redundant, some of it's changing shape, etc. But there is some kind of relation between them. Okay, let's skip free will. That's big topic. Let me see here. So if we look at the influential agency of humans in all these processes, we have the term of authorship. I'm more interested in authorship than copyright. I don't care about the money, but who actually did something through the creative process, etc. And that is also a tricky concept. And then we have the tool makers, and they are becoming more and more important. They have existed for a long time. I mean, there's this century-old spiral of development of, let's say, the piano. I'm a pianist, so that's a good example. Started in the with precursors, the harpsichord, the clavichord, the organ, etc. And Bach tried early prototypes of the piano. It was probably quite bad at that time in the first half of 18th century. And gradually it has become what it is today, and it's still developing, actually. So tool makers create things, they create potentials for playing, and musicians push those tools further, etc. But the maker of my piano, for example, is probably dead since a long time because it's 70 years old, but the tool is still there. The influential agency of algorithms is more tricky. And I think we'll get back to that. There's some overlap between different branches. I have to think about when to dive deeper into it. Especially since a lot of algorithms have what we call emergence, when things get complex and there are higher level behaviors that are not obviously dependent on the low level design. Classic example is an ant farm. An ant is a rather simple creature, but the ant farm, the ant society is rather intelligent and can adapt to very complex situations. Oh, yes, I can try to speak louder.
You can also put up your volume.
Is there a speaker volume too?
Go on.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
When you lower your voice.
Yeah.
And make a little.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me know. I will try to speak up and let me know if I forget about it again. I want you to follow, of course. Yeah. So I was talking about ant farms. Myrstack. in Swedish. Yes, as an example of emergence. I will sort of summarize this idea about influential agency, that as I see it, there's some kind of relation between the amount of influential agency and the amount of information contribution. And in many situations, this is also very similar to the effort put in by an artist, for example. The more effort I put in, the more work usually leads to more detail, more content, more meaning put into the work. So these are somewhat overlapping. And when we think about, if we go to this example of the computer painted like Van Gogh or something like that, we have to remember that there was a human that invented the original algorithm, let's say the neural net in that case, inspired by nature, how our neurons work. There were humans that programmed the particular implementation as some kind of general library without thinking about this particular implementation. There were some human that shows, yeah, I'm going to program a style transfer tool or something like that, and chose these algorithms and this library, etc. There are human choices about how the material is going to be represented, like the painting. Is it going to be a bitmap with this kind of color space, or is it represented as sometimes we use grammars, or there are all kinds of data representations that also affects the results. There are lots and lots of parameters to set. Humans choose the training set for machine learning algorithms. Lots of crucial choices there. Which images to train the system on, filter out the obscene images or the provocative political images, maybe images only of this size, or images only from this artist or something like that. And there are lots of tweaking, trying things out and tweak it until it looks like you want, and cherry picking among generating 100 pictures and pick the best one, etc. And still we say, oh, the computer can paint. But we have all these levels. It's a whole spectrum of influential agency, back from maybe a century ago when some algorithms were originated, maybe not a century in the terms of neural nets, but almost. So we have to remember this. There are lots of humans involved still. Another interesting aspect about agency in code is that a system that generates images, for example, Midjourney is the one I used most myself, so I use that as an example. You write something. It's like a terminal. It's like a chat with a bot. And you write something. Imagine an image that fulfills this kind of description. Some parts of the underlying software is an AI or machine learning, the thing that generates the image. But there are also other parts of the code that takes care of the input, calls for this AI part of the code to generate the image, etc. And the actual decisions are usually taken by the normal code. It's normal loops, if statements and whatever. If you're coders, it's very conventional code set up as usually like an interaction loop. And a large part of what we normally call agency is there. There's a lot of influence, of course, from the AI part on the final outcome, but the choices are often made in normal code, which also complicates things. Let me see here. So in a recent book chapter, I wrote a lot about these kind of things. I use the terms a spectrum of agency, from the tool designer to the tool maker of this particular tool user, the tool itself embedding some agency, and the receiver also has some agency in terms of interpretation, etc. We can also look at tool complexities from super simple tools like a brush to or a musical instrument, maybe, to rule systems, to template-based tools that have sort of ready-made material built in, to generative tools that have huge databases and can really reshuffle things, to autonomous tools that we don't even call them tools at that time. For this one, for some reason, I had the actual illustration here instead on that one. yeah, this is just a spectrum of various degrees of generative power of different kinds of algorithms, but let's not dive too deep into that. But we can understand some examples of this idea of amount of effort, amount of information, etc. If we look at a few cases of amount of effort versus tool complexity or tool size or something like that. Oops, sorry. So the simple cases first. A simple tool with little effort, like playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star with one finger on an unfamiliar instrument. It's a musical instrument. It's sort of a simple tool. It doesn't do anything if I don't interact with it. It doesn't have sort of generative powers, and I'm not good at it. I put very little effort, and the result is probably not very interesting. If you take a simple tool and put in a large effort, like a violin, still a simple tool in a way. Of course, it's advanced, but I practice for years and play like a violin concerto or something. Apply skills from years of training, a lot of information from me, a little bit of information from the instrument. The instrument still defines the space of possible sounds that can come out. Of course, there are some of my skills that indirectly come from others by learning. Somebody also wrote the music, etc. But it's quite a small amount that comes from the tool. And the output is rather complex and potentially very interesting. Then we have a complex tool, but with little effort. Like Midjourney is a super complex tool. It has terabytes of information. It's trained on every image on the internet almost. And I put very little effort. I write, make an image of a sailing boat, something like that. It's a few words. The main part of the influential agency will come from the tool maker or tool makers, because there are a huge amount of people involved. I will rely on ready-made material, a huge database of stuff inside. I'll get a fancy picture of a sailing boat, but I have very little control. And it will probably be, if you write the same thing or you write the same prompt, I mean, you will get equally, because there are chance parts of these algorithms, you get a different sailing boat, but they will be equally good or equally interesting. Are you following? So then there are a few non-obvious cases. We electronic musicians often create our own tools. So there can be a complex tool of my own design, used with very little effort. So I put like 2 years into programming a generative system for musical scores, for example. And then I just start throwing out things, just altering a few parameters. So it's not much effort while using it, but I put a lot of effort when making it. So it's the main influence is still from the toolmaker, like in the previous example. But the toolmaker was me. So I defined the solution space, and I don't put much effort into using it. So here it will be a very interesting result, but it might be the same result every time if I just do the same input. But it's still, I don't have doubts about my authorship and my influential agency, because I'm also the music, I'm also the tool maker. But it's actually still an interesting thing, because this is a true story, because during my doctorate, for example, I developed these kinds of tools. And some of them were just like that. The interaction was not very advanced. I got very interesting material. I used it, I orchestrated it for chamber ensembles, etc. But I never gave that tool to somebody else for this very reason, that everything it spits out comes from the tool maker. It makes Palle music all the time. So I never released that tool, while other tools have a richer interaction process and allows for customization, allows for influence from the user. And those tools were released into commercial products and some public domain software, etc. And that was actually a very conscious decision. I didn't have all these theories, but I felt the difference, and I could formulate why. maybe in different words, but I could formulate that, yeah, this one, if you took that tool and just pressed a few buttons, it would make more Palle music. And that doesn't make sense. Maybe you would feel like you press play on a home keyboard and it plays a wonderful arrangement of Silent Night or something, but you don't feel much agency when it does that, right? It's a similar situation. Then we have another non-obvious case. You have a complex tool made by somebody else, but you use it with large effort. You put as much effort and time into using this tool as you did with a simple tool, as with the violin, etc. Which means that you can explore this huge space of possibilities, but you can reach corners that no one else reached. The further you, the more time you put in, the larger the possibility that you actually go somewhere where no one has been. So you can actually use these tools in new ways, but it's not a shortcut. That's my conclusion. You have to put in as much effort as with other tools. You get new and interesting results, but there's no shortcut for effort. If you want some sense of agency. The last branch in the agency little tree here is the concept of creative agency, which was formulated by Oliver Baun and John McCormack in a paper in 2011. The creative contribution attributable to the actual system. And we don't exactly know what that is. It's sort of hard. It's related to this. I tend to think, oh, everything in the algorithm comes from a person at some point. But then comes this emergence and makes it untraceable. It's impossible to say it was this ant that did this thing in this complex behavior of the ant farm. No, it's the whole system, right? And then suddenly we can't trace it back. So there are no definite answers to this. Like, when do we take our hands off the process and what happens then? What remains of the design of the algorithm over time? Does the solution space change over time, or is it always the same? If you make an algorithm that actually has some kind of feedback process where things grow over time, or that can be very much more, if it has a complex inner state, for example. In an evolutionary process, you can look at the representation, the selection criteria, the genetic operators, are they also subject to evolution as they are in nature? There's a famous paper by Richard Dawkins called the evolution of evolvability, I think it's called, from the 90s, where the parameters of evolution are also evolving. So it's like a meta process. And in those kinds of cases, it's really hard to find who contributed what, because the process is really getting its own life, right? Some other, I don't have any answers to what this is, but these are important factors. There's also good to be familiar with Margaret Bowden, well-known philosopher of cognitive science and AI. She did AI philosophy in the 80s and 90s, and still, I think she's still around, but she's quite old. She early on talked about, in relation to creative process and AI, three kinds of creative process. You have the combinatorial creativity, which means combining things into a new combination, obviously. Exploratory creativity, which is the one I talked most about, exploring a space of possibilities. And the most interesting one, transformational creativity, which means when you actually change the shape of the space. It's the addition of a new knob on the synthesizer, adding a new parameter that completely changes the shape of the space that you explore. And a lot of the tools I developed, in them, I'm actually defining the space myself. So that's a very transformational kind of creativity. I define a mechanism that creates sound, and then I explore it. So then we are in this kind of territory. Let me see here. I think I will mention this one, and then we go to the problems of AI.
You're running out of time.
I know. Can I go on for 5-10 minutes? 5? Okay, then I will skip this one and go to this one, the big one. This is super important to understand because machine learning algorithms are designed to give the most likely answer. Creative process is usually the opposite. So they are actually sort of converging processes. They, I call them mean machines. They sort of generate the most probable output while the artists are doing exactly the opposite. And if we take a little example, if this is a very common thing done with AI to imitate something. If we train a system on Bach's music, Johann Sebastian Bach, he made a selection of 15 two-part inventions that are simple little keyboard pieces that every piano student has played, at least some of them. If we train it on those, if we sort of map the ideas that are in them, the first one has these ideas, the second one has some ideas that weren't in the first one, but they overlap a little bit because they have the same kind of format, and you make a little set of ideas in each one of them, and gradually of all 15, and then you ask a system to make one more. It will generate something that is totally inside this circle, because that's all it knows. It will give you more of the same. But if Bach had written one more, it would have gone outside of the circle, because every one of them added something that is not in the others. If Beethoven had written the 33rd piano sonata, it would have contained material that wasn't in any of the ones previously. And this is the big problem, because then if we generate more, we can generate 1,000 of them, but it still doesn't add anything. It's just part of the same idea space. And this is actually what happens still. I've actually formulated this argument and published it 22 years ago, and I still haven't seen it being contradicted by today's systems. It's just that they have much larger sets. They're still picking things from what they know, putting it together. And they are designed, and I will speed up a little bit. No, I don't even know where that branch is. I'll just say it. They are designed so that the most frequent features are the most likely, which means that the specific examples disappear. They're not generated. You get the most likely thing, you get the most popular thing. It's a populist aesthetics, basically, or actually it's embedded in how these algorithms are formulated, which is a huge problem, as you can imagine. We can probably get back to this in the discussion. There's a lot. I could mention also, I think Bach comes back here. The data that is used to train is also very superficial, because in these are exactly the first bars of all these 15 inventions. It learns the patterns. But if you know the context, and I studied Baroque harpsichord for 3 years, each key, like C major or D major or G minor, etc., they have their character. There was an aesthetic theory called the theory of affections in the Baroque era. Every interval has a meaning. D major is full of fanfares because trumpets were made in that key, and etc. And E major sounded terrible on the most popular tunings at the time, so it's usually very painful. These kind of things is not learned by the algorithms, but they affect how Bach composed. So these kind of, it's trained on a very superficial representation of what is out there. And you remember I said about if we wanted the algorithms to actually be able to have processes and to do these kind of, to surprise us continuously, we have to sort of emulate something that is as complex as the artist's life, because that's where these things originate. Picasso's periods, he was exposed to African art. He changed his way of painting. While an algorithm can learn to imitate that period and that period and that period, but not the causal relations. There are some other problems. The opaqueness, we don't see what they do, so we don't really learn anything, we just get results. They don't have a model of the outside world. We have a huge problem, which is rather new. I lectured about this first time 22, and last year came a lot of publications. I missed an opportunity there of writing early papers, sadly, but I continued the work of thinking about it. When these systems start training on their own output, which has already started to happen, they become autophagous. How would you pronounce that? Autophagous? They eat themselves, basically. So yes, cannibalizing. That's it. So, you know, they throw out images and texts, and a large part and a growing part of the internet is generated already. And it's impossible to with any reliability distinguish between what is synthetic data and what is real data. So they have already started training on data that is synthetic. And that data is less rich, and it has a bias towards the most probable stuff. So this is actually what I predicted 2 years ago, and now other people have done simulations show that they never heard me say this. We were just several people thinking the same thing, so I'm not taking much credit of their work. But now they have shown that what happens is that you cut the tails of the distribution. All the rare stuff disappears from the models completely, and it sort of collapses when you do this. There are so many steps, and in every step there's an information loss of detail, simplification, dimension reduction, and we get even worse, this kind of populist aesthetics. And there's also the effect of resonance, which is my term, where these algorithmic particularities, every algorithm also adds something. There's hidden biases, unconscious biases. There are artifacts in sort of photo sharpening tools, etc. They sort of add stuff. And if you reapply these things, suddenly there are all kinds of weird artifacts that look really weird and strange. And this is very similar to resonance. It's the same as acoustic resonance, or things get amplified when they are reapplied. And so the interesting thing is that the long-term effect of all this, and there are no really known remedies except having fresh data, is that this may actually put a cap on the abilities of this big generative AI that has grown exponentially. But now they are running out of data, and the synthetic data doesn't work. So I'm sort of hoping that this will limit things, and hoping that it will also be a reappreciation of the human creative output, because that is really needed. So I will go to the last branches here and round off. I think
1 minute more.
Yeah, exactly. There are lots of branches, but they're just my conclusions based on, of course, a lot of things that I didn't say now, but because we didn't have time. One thing that I think we need to do is to embrace process and try to create tools that actually encourage interaction, to involve humans in the loop much more and avoid black box processes. We should focus on algorithms that help explore instead of optimize, to get away from this kind of populist aesthetics and giving the most. It works great for entertainment, but it doesn't really work for art. We will use these algorithms for sure. They're here and they're actually fascinating, but we need to also be very critical. They do add new ways of creation, like the gardening paradigm, for example, which we should also embrace. They give us new ways of creating art. But we must think critically about the tools. I can skip this one. Another paradigm that is also really interesting, especially for musicians, is when you think about these algorithms as collaboration partners. You create a network of agents. Some of them are humans, some of them are machines. And there, actually, much more complex behavior will happen between them. For example, Oliver Baum, that I mentioned before, he's been publishing a lot about this kind of creative networks. We can also explore, when there are humans in the loop, you can have much smaller models, and they're still much more interesting, because humans are so complex. We don't need them to emulate us and replace us. That's not the thing. They should just help us do things in new ways. And one branch that I didn't get to, but if we talk about the long-term future, there's the human measure in all of this. They create stuff for our perception, our bandwidth. If they would go somewhere else and become autonomous, why would they even make art for us? They would probably make it for themselves, or 5,000 notes per second, or something that we can't even listen to. So as long as we have human measures involved, it actually will be sort of for us, and the autonomy is not really relevant, actually. And I think still think it's far away for that reason, that it's not really meaningful, because they won't really be autonomous as long as we sort of enforce them to be made to create stuff for us. Yes, that's what I just said. And the future will be interesting. Thank you. And the stuff that I skipped was a lot about aesthetics and a little deeper into the cross-species art. When they become autonomous, why would they make art for us? These kind of things.
Very good. So thank you very much, Palle, for this very interesting talk. And we now get into the question and answer period. And we're going to take questions from here, but also people online. So, Christer, you can write down when you see something. Put it down. Christer is the sidekick today. And for you online, just write your question in the chat box. And since we like to mix researchers from different fields, also tell us your area of study. And we also allow for follow-up questions, which you put up a finger here if you're in the audience, but you can write finger in the chat box and then who you're following up. And for example, follow up to Gustav. So, Christer, you have that on that side, so I can't see it. Yeah. So we start in the back there.
Hi, my name is Sophia. I work here. I'm a sociologist, but I have also been playing bass for most of my life in a band. And I've been thinking about all this AI and music, especially, and your lecture was really, really, really interesting for me. But one thing that I would love you to elaborate more is that maybe it's a little bit romantic question, but for me, like music comes from like experiences and the soul, you know, you go through something through your life and then you bring it in. And that's why for me, AI art seems, it will never have that. It will not experience things in the same way. So could you elaborate a little bit more on, you know, this human part of it, not the effort, but the actual way we experience things to create art?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I agree. I usually avoid saying that music has to do with emotions, because I leave the emotions to the listener. But I mentioned, I touched upon meaning, process. I totally subscribe to the view that a piece of art or music is sort of telling the story of its own coming into being. That is why I talk so much about process, because I think it's during this process all that this imprinting happens. When you play the bass, it's affected by all music you heard, by your mood, by your technique, by your teachers, by all your ideas about music. And you probably play the bass with somebody else. Well, you can play solo too, of course, but you know what I mean. And it's it's a complex dialogue between people full of meaning. And it's exactly that kind of complexity that is, I totally agree with you. It's what is missing from these black box processes. We don't have, I mean, there's a little bit of process when you interact with Midjourney. You'll get a few examples that say, elaborate on this one, make variations on this one. It's sort of like a little interactive evolution kind of thing. But there is nothing of the interaction when a visual artist is spending a week doing an ink painting, for example. With all the depth and detail, where every surface is made by a certain hatching technique, and every line actually has imprints of a shaking hand or imprecision. And yes, I think that comes from the process and the agent behind the process. And we could, and I mean, current algorithm, they can, that's sort of the core problem, is that they imitate the symptoms of this process. So you can, there are AI systems in music are still not on par with the image systems, but they're very close and it's very fast. So maybe they are today, but I haven't tried them yet. They can emulate something that sounds like a bass player, but you don't perceive a bass player, so you don't feel that thing in the room, right? So I totally agree with you. It's that's why I think there must be a human in the loop. And the complexity that is introduced by me playing with even a super simple algorithm, suddenly it sort of explodes. So, well, all I said was, yes, you're right. But still, there are so many interesting interactive stuff you can do with these algorithms. But the thing you're pointing at is one of the main problems, and it's the lack of process. Yes, that's why I'm so focused on understanding process and see how we can act. I think we need completely different algorithms to reach that. And if we do, it will still maybe not be interesting because there's no person behind. Who knows?
Happy with that answer, or did you have a follow-up on that? Take the microphone. If you have a question, you have a hand, and your question or follow-up.
No, I mean, I agree.
Yeah, but do you have a new question or do you have a follow-up question? New question. I put you on the list.
No, just all I wanted to hear a little bit more about, because now it's like what you were talking about was mostly focused on the tools and the output, and less so like if we compare like human-made, like the classical human-made music versus the AI. You haven't really spoken a lot about, you know, the personal agency of an individual who actually creates and has like, but maybe it was in one of these.
I mean, I sort of think I talked about it, but maybe I didn't, because for me it's at the core. I don't find my own. I think for me it's very much in the. Where was the creative process kind of branch? I have too many branches here. Here. The thing that, because I spent like many years understanding this process that you're talking about, and I think we need to understand that before we make creative tools. And today's creative tools are mostly not based even on these ideas. So the reason I say this is not because this process of searching a space and this conceptual representation, material representation, that's where this happens, that the human does that. And in those steps, like 1,000 iterations, every of these iterations, this meaning is induced in the material. And this is what we have, but these tools, when they try to be creative, they don't have. So yeah, maybe I skimmed over it because I've spent so much time on it, but it's there. And I think, so this is not a description of how AI creativity works, it's how we work. And I think I have tried to make AI tools that are in this direction. And it's interesting, but you know, I can't do it all by myself. I think we need to approach this kind of thinking and have process at the center. Then maybe it could approach that kind of quality, complexity, richness.
Valdemar.
Oh, thank you. Very interesting discussion. I would like to ask you on your opinion, because you were talking about somewhere in this process that emergence in the process makes it untraceable. And when I was listening to you, I was thinking about the ideas of sociologists like Elena Esposito and Catherine Hales discussing more of a shift from referencing intelligence, where you put the human intelligence, the human creator, in sort of the middle of this process, because there is always a trace of humanity here, to their thinking that it's referencing communications, more of a new order of orders. So where would you put the limit of this, where the emergence makes the human untraceable? Do you think this has shifted, or is it still about the same? Because it's, in my opinion, it has shifted. I've been playing around with some of these basic music programs for AI, like Suno or Udio, and it's pop music that I'm making. And it's not Max Martin, but it's still sort of bad radio music. And it goes towards this dictum that average is becoming free. And has this perhaps shifted this boundary where you can emergence makes it untraceable?
I'm not entirely sure if, where. I mean, I was mostly talking about emergence in algorithms, and you said emergence from humans. Of course, algorithms are created by humans, so I'm not entirely sure what the actual question is, but I mean, because you also talked about it sort of sounds like radio music, but it's not traceable to a person. I have to find an angle. I formulated something in my mind that I lost. What was that?
You trace it back to a human.
Use the microphone.
You trace it back to a human, but perhaps this new construct of technology, this new construct of communications that these sociologists have a theory about, makes that connection less clear.
Yeah, well, I'm not super familiar with their theory, so I can't answer specifically. But I mean, programming algorithms running is communication processes, and it gets lost somewhere there. I'm not entirely sure if I can answer where that happens, but it actually the whole idea. I mean, if you go back to Roland Barthes' famous "The Death of the Author," it's not really the death of the one author, it's the death of the independent author. It's really like, yeah, everything is derivative if you read it closely. Everything I play comes from who I taught with and what I listened to, etc., which we touched upon before, which means that it's already a mess, what I do, and it's not traceable, but it's there in some way, right? And that's even without any algorithms involved. Then when you start using algorithms, especially with the, I mean, I had this, I think maybe, I mean, you touch upon so many things here, and I don't have any definitive answers, but I mean, we have this one, for example, the opaqueness, the problem of explainable AI, that, you know, they train on, let's say, 1 million songs or something, or all the MIDI files on the internet or whatever. Some of them train on audio, some of them train on musical structure. And what you get out cannot really be traced to, yeah, it's a combination of that song plus that song plus that song. It's more like the training process extracted this kind of common pattern that is triggered by something in a chance process that aligns with the prompt you wrote. So it's basic, those are made in a way that makes them opaque. They are not traceable. But we can say for a fact that everything that is in that model, which is a kind of a database, but a very strange kind of database, just like our brains, it's not very orderly and it's not attributed. So I guess it's somewhere in there in these kinds of systems. Don't know if that's what you're after.
But
it's such a big question.
It's a good comeback, because you tell me that I'm pushing the boundary towards some kind of communications, and it's a construct of man, machine, culture, etc. And you push it back by saying, well, but you're talking about an opaque process. So how can you say from your part? And well, at least I think it complicates the question, and it makes it a bit more interesting.
You call it a comeback. I don't see it as a duel. I think that's an interesting way of finding things out together.
Christer?
Well, thank you so much. Since I'm a philosopher, I have to ask one of those sort of questions about definitions, first of all, and then I have another actually more substantial question. So the question about definition is the definition of art, result of effort that can be subject to reflection. It seems to be all too wide, and I wasn't sure why you took that sort of line, because walking the stairs, brushing my teeth, you know, all those things are art because they require some effort, and they can be subject to reflection about my health of my teeth, or, you know, those very many stairs to, to climb and so on. And so I wasn't sure about why you went for that. Of course, a necessary condition perhaps for art is exactly what you put, but not sufficient. I guess that's the comment. The second question is actually more interesting, namely, you said in the beginning that you wanted to say that it's not better art, but it's different art. But at the end, it suggested that it was actually worse art, because one important aspect of good art is actually creativity, right? And it was quite a negative conclusion. It is a cap on creativity, which means it's it's not just not better; it's perhaps worse. So my question is: are there some aspects of this kind of AI-generated art that's better than human-generated, so to speak, normal art? So that's the substantial question. Sorry, you had two questions.
Yeah,
but the first
very
one,
good questions.
Okay.
It's always tricky to keep two in the mind. I'll start with this definition. I mean, this definition is not part of a big book about what art is, right? It's my I have it's actually intentionally wide, because there are a lot of things that I think can work as art. And you know, there are as many definitions of art as there are philosophers and artists combined. So yes, it's very wide. The key words are maybe human and effort and reflection. For me, they are key. And I could speak a long time about. I mean, I formulated this in my 20s or something, and I kept testing it, and I still think it.
But you just
works
not keep
for
it
me.
as a necessary condition rather than a definition, and you can
Yeah.
avoid all the problems.
Yeah.
As you said, it's key, right? So it's crucial, necessary. Yeah.
Yeah, but actually, I was thinking about that. I think also stuff that I think what fulfills this could work as art also. I mean, I'm not sure it's necessary condition is the right word either. But yeah, I think that's another lecture, but let's go to the other one. It's not a very, I mean, we will not, any seminar that ends up with what is art, you know, will never end. And I went 10 years to our art school, and we always end up there, and will never end. I said this is a very personal definition for me. The bad and good stuff, yes. What I talked a lot about the limitations of these tools, and what happens when you're not aware of those limitations, and when you use them in naive ways without sort of a critical mind. And if there is this huge imbalance between the agency or the influential agency by the user, like writing your prompt, and the huge influential agency by the tool, these terabyte models, you get, I mean, the image looks fine in itself, but it's not very individual. Each one of us could make the same, and you end up in some kind of conformistic stuff that looks more like the tool than you. So it's sort of bad and uninteresting. But I also explained in those situations where it can be good, when you actually spent enough time, you do take care to put in as much effort as before, which means that there will be traces of your actions, your choices. And in that case, it becomes new, different art, which is good, but very different from, it's stuff we couldn't do without these algorithms. So that's what I mean. But when you're not critical enough, when you're not aware, you end up with boring stuff. So that's what I meant. So yes, of course, it can go wrong, and since they are everywhere, and a lot of people are not aware of these things, they don't think about the lack of effort or the lack of agency. They're happy that they get fancy pictures, but everybody else also gets fancy pictures, and so it doesn't really mean anything. So yeah, we need to be critical. That's my answer, basically, and otherwise it will become bad art.
Okay, just a sort of quick reply on the definition. I think you're right that this is sort of a sufficient condition for something that could be art.
Yeah.
But being art is different from could be art, right? So just walking the stairs or brushing my teeth could be art, actually. I'm not denying that, but it's not necessarily art whenever I do it. So,
no, and a lot of things that we do that has this kind of richness because we put in some effort, we can reflect upon it, and it has sort of the same qualities. Maybe we don't call it art, but maybe it's there. I put this in to show that, you know, when I'm thinking about art, have the word human in there, and that was consciously put there to differentiate it from, for example, the beauty of a creek in Lapland, where I have my mountain cabin, and it's not made by a human. I still think it's the most beautiful thing I can see, the little waterfalls and the path it takes, etc. I can reflect on it, but it's not the result of human effort. So it's different. So I thought about all these words, and yes, of course, it covers a lot of things that nobody calls art, but could be promoted to that by Duchamp or somebody. So yeah, it's wide, but it still adds something to the discussion, obviously. So it's worse, and it will never be a definitive definition of art.
Okay, good. So then next gentleman there.
Thank you for this talk. Very interesting and thought-provoking. I'm an actor and director, and so I was, when I came here, I know nothing about AI. And I came because you were going to speak about creativity and art and AI. And I thought, well, what will this be? But it was very interesting, very good.
Glad to hear that.
I would like you to elaborate a little about something that you touched upon when you spoke about Bach. And you spoke about how people perceived at that time the music and forms of music outside the composer, the process. When you use the word process in your talk, you speak about something which is going on between the agent and the tool. It is this process with the tool all the time. But as an actor, for me, the process is with the audience. And art is not understandable without this urge from the subject to reach out from being alone to being together. And that is something that I would like you to speak about, that process.
Mm-hmm. It overlaps quite a bit with the double bass question, right? And I can only say I'm also on stage. I'm performing as an improviser, and the audience is, of course, and the co-players are crucial. And to me, my view of which I think overlaps with what you're saying. I meet so many people who only speaks about how it sounds. And to me, I don't even care how it sounds. I care about the dialogue that we have on stage. And what I think that the audience, I'm not into reception studies or whatever they call it, but because I'm curious in the situation of the musician. But what I think people in the audience perceive when they see, for example, I have an improvisation duo. They perceive our struggle and our dialogue and our efforts. And when we fail, which is also meaningful, so it doesn't mean that it's bad, but we try to build up something, we fail, we go against each other, we have an abstract dialogue. What they feel, partly through like the mirror neuron system or whatever, is the humans living a concentrated life on stage, trying to survive. The odds are not as high so that we die if we fail, but it's really like a little bit of life going on there. But how it sounds is not even important. So we rarely record what we do because that sort of doesn't work. Yes, I agree that is sort of also a version of this process that I had somewhere there. This little that I could speak for hours about. It's a version of that. Of course, the audience, the other people in the room comes in as one of these forces, the the expectations and the response from them complicates things. And I can't. I mean, other people have written much better about that. But yes, it's totally crucial. I agree. But there are also creative processes with. I mean, I talk a lot about tools, but not only about tools. But for me, tools are also theories about things and concepts. And in acting, there are also lots of theories and direction. There's also, even though the tool is the body and the voice and whatever and the props, there are tools also in that world. I've done a lot of theater music, and so I've been a lot in the theater world, and I'm very fascinated by it. I've also done improvisation theater. So I don't know if I answered you. I could only agree, and that this, even what you say, which I agree with, which overlaps with what you said about playing the double bass, makes it even harder for the autonomous AI to make something that would be meaningful for us. But if I play, and I've done this many times, I play on a piano or some kind of other electronics with an algorithm in front of an audience, that can be a very meaningful thing.
Happy with that? Very good. Then we have a follow-up from Sofia. There's also a follow-up from down there, or a new question? Okay. What's your name?
I think I just had an idea when you were talking about audience based on what you said before, and it's a follow-up to this. So in terms of audience, I'm thinking like the difference between the AI generated art and the human on stage and the audience relationship is that, think about Stravinsky, people left when he played. Now we love him or whatever. The interaction between the audience and like real art, I don't know, it's wrong to say it, but in the real way, is more like, yeah, I want to share my art with people. They might not understand it, but there is this interaction there. While for AI is exactly what you said, that is just what is the most popular, what is the most frequent. So the audience for the AI art is of a different meaning, right? You will just pick up what people already like. So what the interaction will come.
Yeah.
Could that be something?
I somewhere in some of the branches, I probably won't find it now, but because there are too many. I did mention entertainment and art, and I see a very clear correlation between these two paradigms. The algorithms that go for the most probable, the most likely, the most frequent, like all machine learning algorithms do, is very similar to Hollywood making a movie and doing lots of audience tests with focus groups, etc., and adjusting the editing so that it works in the way they want. While me as an artist, I can never decide how people should react to my art. The only thing I know is that nobody will react in the way I think. Nobody will read my music or interpret it like I do, for sure, because we're all so different. So having a fixed idea about how it will be received is a sure failure. So artists are, on the border and trying to push that border further out, and it goes against how these algorithms are created. So yes, now I lost the thread where I started, but this is very much related, and this whole situation. I mean, we're all doing it on stage. That feeling or the meaning of doing that, of course, it would not be the same. Yeah, we can build a machine that reads text or plays, but it's sort of it's a different thing. Thank you.
Very good. So join me in thanking for this very interesting talk. It's actually one more research seminar coming up on June 19. We have Katarina Bent Rasmussen, who is a political philosopher. Don't know exactly what she's going to speak about. Then we start again September 4th. So welcome next week and then next September. Thank you very much.
Thank you.